this is our second interview, and we'll continue to talk about the Covid dossier that the two of you put together. The Covid dossier, a record of military and intelligence coordination of the global Covid event. And when we did our first interview last month, we talked about the PrEP Act and we talked about the Pandemic Crisis Action Plan that Debbie had discovered and that had been changed or adapted specifically for COVID-19 on the request of the National Security Council. And so we talked about that, and that it shows clearly that it was not the Department of Health and Human Services that was in charge, but that it was the National Security Council. So, Debbie, you told us that you found this PAN-CAP adapted, that's what it's called, PAN-CAP adapted. You found this document lying on a New York Times server. It was just lying there. And apparently, it had been leaked to the New York Times, but they either didn't realize the meaning, or if they did, they were not interested in publishing its explosive content. And then we ended the first interview with Debbie just explaining the PAN-CAP and what it means. So maybe I'm thinking, since the first interview is a while ago, maybe it's a good idea to start right where we ended and give a quick recap of this PAN-CAP. Recap of the PAN-CAP. It's almost poetic. And what I'll do here is I'm going to share my screen. I'll go right into the PAN-CAP, and that is Debbie's PDF version. She annotated it. She highlighted certain passages to make them stand out, and there are also comments in it. So I'm going to share that one, and so then you can tell me where to go, and people can, for those of our listeners who also watch the interview, they can see the text black on white.
And thanks, Cornelia. That's great. I'll just add that PAN-CAP-A stands for Pandemic Crisis Action Plan. So it's the government's pandemic action plan, which has various iterations. We know of one from 2018, and then we know of this one where they took the one from 2018 and they adopted it for COVID, which is why it's the Pandemic Crisis Action Plan adapted.
Yes, and adapted in a very peculiar way.
Very peculiar.
So, and then after we have done that, we are going to jump into the Covid dossier. And I mean, literally, I'll again screen share, and we're going to go in it and see what's there and jump into some of the links, because there is a ton of stuff so that people get an idea and get curious, to discover. It's like you go into this discover mode and see what's in there. And depending on where you're from, you might go to certain countries or, certain areas. So we're going to do that afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen. Here is the famous PAN-CAP adapted. All right, Debbie.
All right. So yeah, if you want, it's dated March 13th, 2020. And so that's when officially everything in this document is happening. That doesn't mean it wasn't happening before. We do know that starting in January of 2020, the National Security Council classified all of the COVID meetings. So the COVID meetings were taking place in a high security room at HHS, which is reserved for times of biowarfare and terrorist attacks. And you can't go in there with any cell phones, recording devices, or anything at all. Many people didn't have high enough security clearances to even go into those meetings, probably including Robert Redfield, the head of the CDC, and other very high public health officials. So basically, we have no idea what the government was talking about starting in January 2020 about COVID-19. It wasn't called COVID-19, but about the novel coronavirus is what they were calling it back then. So basically, the National Security Council was in charge in January 2020. This is the first document that I was able to find, or pretty much the only one, where that is actually explicitly stated in writing, although the Reuters report about the classification of the meetings does say that they were classified, but the request for classifying those meetings was made by the National Security Council. So they were in charge in January 2020 already. So so let's look at the document and see where it shows that. And also what's interesting about the document is that it is actually in its essence a public health document. It says this is how we are going to deal with pandemics in a public health manner. But then there's all kinds of insertions that is why it's called adapted, where it's adapted to COVID-19, in which actually this is no longer a public health operation. Now it's actually a national security operation. So the first section here that's highlighted is an insertion, and it was inserted for COVID specifically, because what happened was, even though it says the Department of Health and Human Services serves as the lead federal agency, actually it's the vice president who's leading the effort, and the vice president is in charge of the COVID task force. The COVID task force is led by Deborah Birx, who comes from USAID, and the policy is set by the National Security Council. So if you want to scroll down, I think the best thing to look at is probably the org chart. We can go look at some other stuff after that.
So Debbie, all the yellow highlighted sections, are those the sections that were added to this document?
Well, I mean, one can only guess, but what I just want to note that all of these annotations were made because Jay Bhattacharya, the NIH secretary, asked me to send him this document with the annotations. And then he interviewed me about this document and the annotations. So that's an interesting context for this.
Yeah, and that was of course before he became head of NIH.
Yeah.
Okay, so where is, let me see, let's go a little bit further down, mission. Yeah, this is actually also interesting, right? This section here, the National Security Council requested adaptation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the National Security requested adaptation, meaning that everything that we see that's written in here that was inserted by the request of the National Security Council.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is interesting. The plan builds on objectives that prepare the United States government to implement broader community and healthcare-based mitigation measures. Now, there's 3 documents that are footnoted and referenced in this PANCAP A that I have been FOIA-ing the government for 2 years to try to get. And I still am in a 2-year and ongoing FOIA battle. I still haven't gotten them. So look at where it says strategic objectives. Nope, you just passed. So it says strategic objectives.
And here we go, up here, right?
And it says footnote, and it says these objectives were directed by the NSC Resilience DRG PCC on February 24th, 2020. So the National Security Council Resilience, I wish I remembered what those things were. Cornelia, I know you and I talked about that.
Our RG was research group, the Defense Research Group or something like that.
Yeah.
And
so that's one of the documents that apparently or one of the footnoted sources for the objectives. So it says the objectives of the government's COVID response plan were directed by the National Security Council Resilience Directorate. And so that's one of the things that I have on my FOIA. And I said, okay, well, if our government's COVID response plan is directed by this particular thing, I would like to see this particular thing, because it's not it's not publicly available. And yet.
And you started FOIAing it when?
May 2023.
And nothing yet.
Yeah. No, I hired a fancy, I did it for about 8 months by myself. They completely stonewalled me. They sent it to CDC, HHS, blah, 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 blah. And then I got a fancy lawyer. That fancy lawyer now works for the Trump administration, unfortunately. But he, we went back and forth, and now I have another lawyer from the same law firm, and we're still going back and forth. At this point, I'm just asking them to tell me in writing, and I'll explain later why I FOIA'd FEMA. That's who I directed my FOIA to. And right now, I know I'm not going to get these documents, but I'm asking them to say whether those documents are in their possession. If they're in their possession, why am I not allowed to see them? And if they're not in their possession, why? Because they are supposed to be the lead federal agency for the COVID response. So that's all I'm trying to get out of them right now. I'll explain that as we go through this, Cornelia.
Okay.
Yes,
So
hold on. Let me add about resilience. It's a very, very important word.
good.
It stands for a number of things.
Yeah.
One of them is this, apparently there is this National Security Council Resilience Directorate for research, military research, defense research. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing, there is a National Resilience, which is a company. It's a private company, ostensibly private company, with Scott Gottlieb as one of the board members. It's affiliated with CIA. I wrote several articles about it. Actually, several people pointed this out. They bought up, so this is clearly U.S. government, CIA, defense-backed enterprise that purchased a number of formerly pharmaceutical companies owned biological manufacturing facilities. So they bought them from Pfizer, from Roche, I know, from several others. So now they have this humongous number of manufacturing plants, and they call themselves a contract manufacturing facility for pharmaceutical companies. But they are mentioned in a number of very interesting things. For example, I also wrote an article about J.D. Vance, who invested in this company, Amplify Bio, which is the contract research organization doing animal studies for pharmaceutical companies. And so his company, a parent company, Battelle Institute, which is a DoD-affiliated entity, they were running several studies. One of them was making a chimeric Nipah Ebola virus. It's published in Science paper. They're saying we made this chimeric Nipah Ebola virus, and the collaborators on this project, including Amplify Bio, who provided the animals. So importantly, they mentioned resilience, who manufactured this Nipah Ebola virus for them, and NIH collaborators who rescued that viral strain. I don't know where they rescued it from, probably from Africa. So that's the collaborations that we're talking about. So resilience, if you start digging, and I even wrote an article says all roads lead to resilience. When you start digging and peeling back the layers, you always arrive at resilience as a manufacturer of these types of things. And they're backed by CIA, by DoD, and obviously they have relationship with this National Security Council Resilience Group. I mean, it's probably their I mean, like their representative. And this is how.
Yeah, I would even say, Sasha, that's really, yeah, I think all of that research is incredibly important and valuable. So thank you for all of that you did.
Yeah,
because I think it's really important to understand that a lot of times they use the same word for the public entity and the private entity. So this is the public entity, the National Security Resilience Directorate or whatever group. And then they use the same word in a confusing manner so that we don't know if it's public, if it's private, if it's referring to the government part of it, is it referring to the private company part of it? But actually, it's all the same thing. So I think the most important thing to realize here, and we'll get to this later when we talk about the dossier, is it is a public-private partnership. There's no space, there's no sunlight between the public and the private parts of this operation.
No arm's length anymore. They're all completely fused together. And also another thing is they use this word resilience colloquially as well. So it's sort of confusing. And so but listen for, like, when you read or listen to their speeches about these things, when you hear resilience, your ears should perk up. They're talking about this.
Yes. And so in this document, it specifically states that the objectives of the COVID response plan were directed by the National Security Council Resilience Directorate. Okay, let's see it.
Right. So, Debbie, so this company that Gottlieb founded, correct?
Well, he's on the board of the company.
Oh, he's on the board of it. Okay. So that company has the name National Resilience. That's such a weird name.
It is a weird name.
Company,
right?
National Resilience.
Yes, they sometimes refer to it as resilience. And it had a number of different names before. So they kind of like rolled a bunch of companies into this and eventually called it National Resilience. It was called Ology before, and as I said, they also have like facilities that they bought up. But it's the U.S. government controlled biologics manufacturing that's owned and controlled by military and intelligence interests.
Okay. All right.
So that's one of the documents that I'm trying to FOIA, that I've been trying to FOIA for 2 years. The next one is where it says on the next page, this concept of operations aligns. Nope, it's right at the top of that page. Yeah, right at the top of that page. It says it aligns.
Oh, here we go. Right.
Yeah. This concept of operations aligns interagency triggers to the CDC intervals for each phase and groups key federal actions according to response phase. That's the normal thing. So the normal thing when you respond to a pandemic, whatever, to an outbreak of a novel disease, is you look for places where people are getting sick with something that you don't recognize, and then in those places you trigger certain responses. So it always triggers in different places at different times. It triggers according to what's happening in each place. So you don't like declare a state of emergency anywhere and everywhere. You only look at like the places where things are happening. So this is a normal way of doing things. Like you trigger the intervals for each phase of the response according to what's happening in each place at each time. And you expect it to be different, and you expect it to evolve, and you expect the conditions on the ground to change, and you expect the response to change based on the conditions on the ground. Okay. But
Right.
then,
So that means this sentence or a very similar sentence would have been in the previous PANCAP versions.
Yes, absolutely. But then it says it also layers in the COVID-19 containment and mitigation strategy developed by the National Security Council. Now, the National Security Council is not a public health body. So if the National Security Council is developing a containment and mitigation strategy, that is not a public health containment and mitigation strategy. That is something that has to do with warfare, biodefense, or something else. And so I also put that in my FOIA request. What is the containment and mitigation strategy developed by the National Security Council, which is layered into this concept of operations?
Right. And this sentence you did not find in the previous versions.
No, definitely not.
And not obviously not regarding COVID-19, but also not regarding something else, some other disease.
No.
Okay.
No. Now, let's look at the next highlighted paragraph. It's really important. So on January 27th, the president's coronavirus task force was formed. The task force was initially led by the Secretary of Health and Human Services and coordinated through the National Security Council. On February 28th, very important date, the task force transitioned to the office of the vice president, meaning it's no longer under the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now it's under somebody else. Is it under the vice president? Well, not exactly, because doesn't say it's led by the vice president. It's led by the office of the vice president. The office of the vice president is where they put the task force, which was the coordinator of which was Deborah Birx, as I said before, who came from USAID, and she was placed there by the national security advisor to President Trump. He himself says it. He says, we brought Deborah Birx over. And look at what it says here. This is very, very interesting. The OVP, the Office of the Vice President, which equals the task force, which equals the National Security Council, leads and coordinates all federal communication and messaging, both across the United States government and internationally with the World Health Organization and affected countries. Starting on February 28th, there was no more communication from the public health agencies to anyone. And there's a lot of records that show, a lot of FOIA emails and stuff, which people didn't look at this aspect of it, but you can see it in there, where people at the CDC are saying, we tried to send this to the task force. We have to send all of our communications to the task force. It's very frustrating. because we can't say anything and they're not approving anything. So we just gave up. So we're not trying anymore. And Redfield is on record also saying that, they weren't even allowed to have their own press conferences. So there was no communication starting on February 28th, when there was barely anything happening in the United States in terms of deaths or cases or anything like that. No more communication from the public health agencies. The other very important thing to know is that on February 27th, and I've written a lot about this, the entire messaging switched from public health to lockdown until vaccine. So between February 26th and 27th, Anthony Fauci flipped completely on masks and on lockdowns. A lot of the propaganda, like the flatten the curve, came out on February 27th in a very dubious manner with a lot of anomalies in terms of, who put it out and what dates it got put out. People like Zeynep Tufekci, who nobody had ever heard of, and now is like the big commentator at the New York Times. She all of a sudden came out with articles saying we have to lock down and that masks work, even though she had absolutely no qualifications to say any of those things. And then she got promoted to be like the voice of the New York Times on the pandemic. It was unbelievable. So all of those things happened on February 28th. 27th, I'm sorry. And then on February 28th, you can see that no more, that's it. So that's no more communications are coming from public health. Now all the propaganda is coming from the National Security Council.
Oh, wow. So that's okay. So in all likelihood, that's highly significant. Interesting that you dug into the dates like this. This is very, very interesting. So right around the time, a little bit earlier, one or 2 days before February 28th, you observed how the messaging just completely switched to locking down, to mitigations that were never used before. And then right a day or two after, on February 28th, the task force transitioned to the OVP, the Office of the Vice President. And so on January 27th, this task force was formed, 27th. So that was a whole month earlier. And I would think, was there a lot of reporting about this?
Yeah, the January 27th forming of the task force. Yeah, that was public knowledge. That was, Azar and everybody standing around and having, press conferences and stuff. That was not a secret.
Okay.
When it was
Okay.
transitioned, the transition,
yes,
that was the part that was not advertised. So it existed.
Okay.
Deborah Birx was like parachuted in on the 27th of February. And that's when the whole thing transitioned. But when she was parachuted in, all they said was, oh, she's a public health expert. She, worked on AIDS in Africa. She worked for
Right.
USAID, which we all know now what that is. It's a CIA cutout.
And
so she works
exactly.
for the
and
CIA.
she's also a colonel. And
she's a colonel. Yes.
That was
she's a colonel.
Yes.
Yeah. She's a military.
She's a military intelligence person. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, but back to January 27th. So it was reported on that this coronavirus task force was formed, but now did they report what is in this next sentence? Namely, it was initially led by Secretary of HHS and coordinated through the NSC, because that is again something that did not happen in earlier
No,
PANCAPs.
they never communicated to the public that NSC was in charge. The only communication about this was from Debbie first, and then we started writing articles.
Yes.
Practically nobody knows about this. And
Okay.
another important date between the 27th of January and 28th of February was February 4th, when they did communicate to the pharmaceutical companies. So there was an outbound call from DOD, from DARPA, going to pharmaceutical companies, hundreds of companies in the consortium, telling them to switch to COVID products, COVID models, because COVID was declared national security threat. So this was communicated to the consortium of pharmaceutical companies, probably under NDAs, very strict NDAs, but was never communicated to the public, not to this date. Nobody has acknowledged it. And this is critical. This is important because this classifies the whole campaign, the whole response. And we still do not have the truth. They're still lying to us.
Right. And that's why they backdated the PrEP Act from March 17 2020 to February 4th to cover those 6 weeks when they had already told all these companies to start working on COVID-19 products, correct?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Let's continue. Where shall I go next?
Keep going. And I think we're going to look for that org chart just so that we can visualize it. There it is.
Here,
So
here we go.
this is the first thing when I looked at this document. So I was going through and reading all the government documents from the beginning of time, actually maybe from the beginning of the 20th and 21st century. So like starting in 2000 for pandemics. I was just reading all the documents and I found this one and I saw this chart. And as you can see, there's two things that are not green and blue. So in all the other ones, everything is green and blue, which is it refers to FEMA, it refers to HHS. But all of a sudden you have this new thing here, which is National Security Council, and that's the policy. So the policy of the task force, and the task force, as we just read, is in charge of policy, right? The White House Task Force, which is housed in OVP, Office of the Vice President, it's headed by Deborah Birx or coordinated by Deborah Birx. And it says three things. It says WMD, weapons of mass destruction. Why is the policy for COVID-19 or the novel coronavirus, which came from bats and pangolins and raccoon dogs, why does that require policy based on weapons of mass destruction? Interesting. That floored me when the WMD, I kind of, that was a long time ago when people weren't talking about the fact that the policy was a military intelligence, biodefense policy. So weapons of mass destruction. BATS is the travel security. I forget what BAT is. It's something about travel security. And then resilience is resilience. We just talked about it. So this whole policy block is about military intelligence response to a supposedly naturally occurring virus, to which we have plenty of public health plans that can help us deal with a naturally occurring virus in a very normal and non-hysterical way.
So these three things that they have, so they have this big box for National Security Council, and inside these three smaller boxes that you just went over, WMD, BATS, and resilience. So how would you correct? What word do you use? So weapons of mass destruction, okay, but what do they mean when they refer to WMD? BATS seems to be some sort of I don't know, in a sub-agency or policy or.
So I would imagine that those are sub-policy groups. So the National Security has lots of subgroups advising on various things. So I'm sure they have a subgroup that advises on WMD. They have a subgroup that advises on travel security, and they have that subgroup on resilience that we were talking about before. I think there's a lot of overlap, and maybe those squares just represent different areas that they were considering when they were considering their policy.
Right. It's just,
but it doesn't say public health.
It doesn't say public health. Yeah. So this speaks to the response, as Debbie initially started characterizing this, and I totally agree with. So the response itself tells us about the nature of the thing that was being responded to. And the response is to the CBRN attacks. CBRN is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons of mass destruction. And so, of course, no surprise, we have this WMD sub-box there. And so the nature of the response was from the start as if there was a bioweapons or chemical weapons attack. Now, whether there was one or wasn't one remains to be, investigated. However, we know for sure as of January or early February, there was no evidence that there was one of any kind. We had more problems with traffic accidents and smoking related deaths and, other many other issues. And this was probably, item number 1,000,001 on the list of things to worry about. Yet our government creates this massive issue out of nothing, responding as if we were nuked.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And this whole document, this PANCAP adapted, it's a very calm document. I mean, there's not, if there were now, let's see, there were in real national security threat,
Right.
it wouldn't. It would. I
It
think it
wouldn't
would be.
look like
It would
that.
be very. No, it wouldn't look like this. I would think it wouldn't look like this. Also, you said that. I think Sasha, you mentioned in the first interview that the guy who spoke on this leaked interview, not interview, telephone or what meeting, I think it was, when they were told start working on it's a national security threat and start working on COVID-19 stuff, that they were not alarmed but more rather happy about it.
Yeah, they were happy about it because they treated the pharmaceutical consortium treated it as yay, hooray, finally we're gonna get the real dollars. So before they were being paid by DARPA and the DoD in more or less relatively smallish grants, although Moderna has been received hundreds of millions of dollars, but other companies received more reasonable type of grants to work on science, and so they were happy doing that. And now they're like, this is the big one, and we're going to get a real payday. And that's why they were so excited about it. They didn't.
And I want to say, Sasha, it's not just the payday. It is the payday, but mostly what I've understood through your work and my work and our work together. And I think I've come to this conclusion recently, or this understanding, is that the designation of something as a national security threat is a purely legal definition that the public-private partnership uses in order to bypass all regulation and the Constitution. So basically, it is a designation that allows them to operate extra constitutionally and completely outside of any regulatory framework. So that's why when they declare it, they're not declaring that there's a national security actual danger. What they're declaring is we are now shifting into a different legal framework so that we can do all these things that we've been planning and that we want to do. Yeah, the money is there, obviously, at the end, but it's also a total lack of liability with the PrEP Act, and it's a total lack of regulation with EUA. And all of that is unleashed when you declare it. So that's why it's such a disconnect between what one would think of as, oh my God, there's a national security threat, versus how calmly people talk about it, how calmly, Cornelia, you just pointed out, this document kind of lays it out in a very calm and bureaucratic manner. It's not even like a military declaration. There's no like, oh my God, we're going to mobilize this and that because people are under attack. Our country is under attack. None of that. They're very calm because it is not real. It's not about a real threat. It's about shifting the legal framework. That's it. So national security.
Very interesting, right?
Yes.
So it's like shifting into using this national security threat to shift into a gear, like you shift into an extra constitutional gear. All of a sudden, you're outside of law and outside of the Constitution, and that really is true for the PrEP Act as well. Because in the PrEP Act, it says, there has to be, I don't know, either an existing emergency or just the credible risk that such an emergency might constitute sometime in the future, which is always. So you can just, you can be in the PrEP Act, you can evoke the PrEP Act all the time, anytime.
Yeah, and that's what they have done. So, and actually, doesn't say that it's credible. It's only opinion of HHS secretary, DHS secretary, or DoD secretary that there is a threat or potential threat, or there needs to be more science done in this particular area. Okay, so that's how these declarations are issued. So, opinion of one person, which is unreviewable by Congress, unreviewable by judicial branch. Talk about unconstitutionality of it, right? It's only them saying so.
Can't be challenged by state law.
It can't be challenged. It preempts state law, preempts all of your constitutional rights, strips you of your rights. And so all of this awfulness is unleashed based on one person say so. At that time it was Alex Azar. Now it's RFK Jr. So I have been calling him on this, and I invite everyone to do so. He can undo it. He can undo it with a stroke of the pen. They use this to commit massive crime. He has the power, and he can do it finally for good. Okay, before we repeal this PrEP Act. But they're sitting on it and doing nothing. And to me, this says that what we're discussing is highly relevant because they have classified this. It's National Security Council issue. and it's above RFK Jr.'s pay grade. So so that's another evidence that our government is lying to us of the nature of this whole thing. The nature of this whole thing is a classified military campaign, and the purpose, as Debbie discussed, is to open this window where they can do whatever they like, and they have no law and no constitutional constraints and no liability.
Yes, yes, and that there's no that RFK doesn't talk about it and
It does not yet.
hasn't done it, but that there's absolutely no discussion of any of this.
Mhm.
That's really disconcerting, very disconcerting. Okay, so let's have a look again. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because this is quite a confusing whatever this is, org. I don't know.
Org chart.
It's not really an org. Yeah. Okay. So this ESFLG, what is that?
You know what? I don't care because they're not in charge. So it used to be that the CDC and the HHS were in charge, as you can see, and now the White House Task Force and the National Security Council are in charge. The rest of it, to me, doesn't matter at all because they've canceled it. They canceled it.
So you have two big blocks. You have policy, you have this coordination thing in the middle, how things are being coordinated among all these myriad of agencies and whatever groups. And then you have operations, and they are just enforcing whatever is decided by the policy. So who is sitting at top is the policy guys, and that's the National Security Council.
Right. Yep. And what's important is what is the policy based on? And as you can see in those three squares, it's based on a lot of things that have to do with, biowarfare or bioterrorism. It has nothing to do with public health. So that's the most important thing. So that's why the rest of it got canceled. Now, it got canceled even more. This document is from March 13th, 2020. So this is official. This is the official kind of document that shows who was in charge. But it still says in all these different places that HHS is the lead federal agency for pandemic response. That is by law. The law says that when there is a public health emergency, HHS is the lead federal agency. Lead federal agency means they're the ones who are in charge of coordinating, of operations, and of policy. Okay. So that's what a lead federal agency is supposed to do. However, 5 days after this, on March 18th, and this is something that nobody reported on, but it's in the public record all over the place, HHS was no longer the lead federal agency. All of a sudden, FEMA, which had never, ever been in charge of anything related to public health, they're always related to, catastrophes like fires and earthquakes and floods, and what FEMA does. They help people when they have very acute emergency situations that have nothing to do with public health. So all of a sudden, FEMA was in charge. They were like deers in the headlights in all of their documents. They say, we didn't know it, we didn't expect it, we've never done it. And they didn't even know what the policy was supposed to be. But basically, they are actually housed under the Department of Homeland Security. So when they became in charge, it was the Department of Homeland Security that was in charge. So then we had the policy being determined by the National Security Council, and everything else, the coordination, the operations, all of that being done through the Department of Homeland Security, which they sort of shoved FEMA out in front of it to distract people, but it was actually the Department of Homeland Security. So my FOIA actually is to FEMA, because if FEMA was the lead federal agency, they should have the planning documents for the response. And if they don't have the planning documents for the response, then they need to tell me why they don't have them, or just tell me that they don't have them, and then I'll know that they weren't really in charge. And they don't want to do that. So for 2 years, it's been a battle. Even if I can't get the documents, they won't even tell me who has the documents and who is not releasing those documents to me. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And FEMA is a sub-agency of Homeland Security.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is a bit strange because it's for national disasters, right? Floods and fires and.
Right. Oh, and the other thing that happened on March 18th, to follow up on that, Cornelia, is President Trump evoked the Stafford Act. The Stafford Act is an emergency act that unleashes funds for FEMA, basically. So like if there's a flood or an earthquake in Idaho, then the governor of Idaho declares a state of emergency in Idaho and asks the federal government to declare a state of emergency under the Stafford Act so that like funds and resources can be released to deal with it. So that happens in different states at different times when there's different disasters. But on March 18th, 2020, President Trump declared a Stafford Act in every single state simultaneously, which has never been done in the history of the United States. And yet nobody reported on it. And at that moment, FEMA also was made the lead federal agency. So basically unleashing all the FEMA funds, which flow through the Department of Homeland Security, and taking HHS, which as we've seen in this document, HHS, CDC, they were already taken off of the communications, right? They weren't communicating anymore about the pandemic to the public. All the communications were coming from the National Security Council through the task force. So they weren't in charge of communications. They were nominally in charge of coordinating and operating, as it shows in this flow chart, in this org chart. However, on the 18th, which is only 5 days after this document, they weren't in charge of anything at all. So this document became obsolete on the 18th of March. And there are documents, there are records when they did a year later in 2021, they went back, the Office of the Inspector General and all these sort of agencies went back to see and evaluate how they did. How was the response? How did they do? Did they do well? What did they do wrong? And so there is testimony saying from FEMA, first of all, we had no idea what was going on. We weren't ready for this. They say PANCAP A specifically. So that's how we know that this document is indeed the government planning document referred to by the government agents themselves. It says they did not update PANCAP A when they made FEMA the lead federal agency. They didn't update it.
Did they ever update it?
We don't have an updated version, and the FEMA testimony says that they didn't. I think they just abandoned this document. Like they started playing around with it and saying various things. Maybe when it got leaked to the Times, they decided to abandon it. Maybe they just abandoned it. But since everything is classified anyway, we have no idea what the actual planning documents are.
So that means that this document that we are looking at, which was issued on March 13th, 2020, that's the correct date, right? March 13th. Mm-hmm. So that was valid. That was up to date for only 5 days until March 18 or until March 18,
exactly
2020. So for 5 days, and then it was outdated and was never updated again. And on March 18, FEMA became this lead agency. Well, in other words, it was, since FEMA belongs to Homeland, Department of Homeland Security. It's really Department of Homeland Security that took over on March 18, and that's also 1 day after the PrEP Act was declared. So a lot of all this stuff was shifting really rapidly in this time frame between February 4th and March 18, when they had most of the pieces in place then by then, right? When that's exactly when the lockdown started.
That's a very good point. And I think this is a good segue actually to the dossier, because the exact same thing that we're discussing here, that's shift in timeline, in emergency declarations, and also the shift in terms of the agencies that were in charge, happened in every other country in the same way. So after we look at what happened in the United States, and this is also how my research kind of progressed, I started looking at the fact that the same thing happened everywhere else. And so Sasha and I put the dossier together to show that this exact same timeline and this exact same process that you just described, Cornelia, how quickly between February 4th and March 18th, everything shifted. There were emergency declarations that were unprecedented. The leadership of the response shifted from public health to military intelligence. That happened in England and Canada and Australia, in Germany, in Holland, in France. I mean, it happened in many, many countries. So that's what we document in the dossier.
Okay, great. So remind me again when you found this PANCAP document.
I think I found it in 2022.
Do
That's
you
when I
remember beginning and middle?
I would have to look up when I wrote the first article for Brownstone about it. I can look that up if you want.
Okay, so you found it in 2022, and then you started. I mean, you realized immediately, I think, when you saw this, that this was something pivotal that you had discovered, right?
I
And
didn't sleep for a week. I thought that I was going to publish this, and so did Jeffrey Tucker at Brownstone. I mean, when he saw this, and so did everybody who read it on Brownstone. Everybody was completely floored by it. Like,
right,
this is going
because
to be
yes,
now. This is going to be front page news. Now everybody's going to figure out what actually
exactly.
happened, and everybody's going to say, like, "Oh, okay, so now we understand why this happened."
Exactly. So you realize it's a bombshell. Other people realized, and you were at that point, you were already affiliated with the Brownstone Institute. So you had an outlet where you could write about it. So what happened? So you wrote about it, and
And
what was?
crickets. Same with Sasha's incredible bombshell recording. So that is a smoking gun. People are always asking for
Yeah,
smoking guns, right? Which is very, very difficult when it has to do with classified national security operations, because there are no smoking guns. That's what it means to be classified and national security. So when Sasha found the smoking gun, which was the phone, which was an executive admitting that he got a call from someone at the Department of Defense telling him on February 4th that it was a national, that is a smoking gun. That's not an inference. We're not inferring. We're not guessing. We're not saying, well, because of this, then obviously that. We're not saying any of that. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a conjecture. It's not an educated guess. That
yeah.
is a
I mean, it's
smoking
Debbie,
gun.
it's more than that. It's just like you're witnessing the firing of the gun. It's not
Yeah,
just smoking. It's there. You are
yeah,
right there when it's being fired. When it's
right,
being fired.
right.
Exactly.
So I'm looking at my first article, which was called Government's National Security Arm Took Charge During the COVID Response. And it's from November 3rd, 2022.
Okay, so end of 22. And so you started writing about it probably during that first sleepless week. You started writing about what you found, I would think, pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and you wrote about it on Brownstone, and it wasn't picked up anywhere
Except by Sasha. So the way I
except
met Sasha, the way I became aware of Sasha, because she was not even on Substack at the time, or maybe you had started at that time.
I started writing Substack like in December 22.
So what happened was you started because Sasha had been doing all this work on the batches. And she was doing it on was that platform, Sasha?
So I was publishing just videos on BitChute because
BitChute.
I was censored everywhere, and there was no sense to go to YouTube or anything. So BitChute was the only place which wasn't censoring videos, and I was just putting like PowerPoint presentations there. And then I also was collaborating with Craig Parody Cooper on How Bad Is Your Badge? So he had a very popular website, How Bad Is Your Badge? And I was publishing my materials there as well. That was it. And then I found Substack, and I found Debbie's piece, and I also found Catherine Watt, and eventually, I was like, okay, maybe I should. People started asking me to write articles, and so I started Substack at that time as well. But yeah.
And so I saw your article. So Sasha wrote an article where she used that chart that we just looked at.
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh my God, somebody saw it. Somebody understands how important this is. And then shortly thereafter, I contacted Sasha through her Substack. I just said, hey, this is great. Your work is amazing. Call me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, Debbie, you did the interview on American Thought Leaders in 2023 in the spring, in April, correct?
Right.
In April 2023. So that gave it some. I have to look up how many views it got, but
it got about 70,000, which was not
70,000.
Mm-hmm. Sasha's interview got like about 100 or something, right?
Yeah,
Sasha?
there was few hundred thousand views.
Yes, and yours was a little bit later. I think it was in the summer of 2023.
Yeah.
So did anything follow from that? Did anybody pick it up from those interviews?
Nobody in the mainstream wants to touch this, even though the tape and the documents that Debbie found, these are bigger than Watergate. Okay, this is such a journalistic boon. This and in the North, if we had honest journalists still left, they would be all over this. This is such a humongous piece of news, and nobody wants to hear it. Not Tucker Carlson, not Joe Rogan, no. The most mainstream I can get, and I thank him, is Dr. Drew. Ask Dr. Drew. Yeah. Okay, and he tells me I traumatize him, but he still invites me. So
you traumatize him. And he has a big following. He has, I don't know, millions,
he has pretty big following. I mean, so the message has been getting it, but that's the highest, mainstream I can get to is Ask Dr. Drew. And Kelly Victory is, his partner. They've been pushing my information, but that's about it. I can't get anywhere else, and nobody.
And I have to tell you, when I discovered this and I saw that nobody was responding, I reached out to who I thought were the journalists who would be interested. So I reached out to Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, Glenn Greenwald. So these are people who deal with national security issues. The security state is their beat. They saw through Russiagate. They saw through the Hunter Biden laptop psyop. So they saw through some of the psyops that happened in the first Trump administration. And when I tried to alert them to this psyop, they didn't want, I got no response. I did manage to get in touch with Alex Gutentag, who works with Michael Schellenberger. But every time I asked, and I don't need any credit for any of my work. Like, I just want it to get out. So I said to these journalists, you guys are real journalists. I'm a fake journalist. I'm not trained. I've never done it before. I'm a writer and a researcher, but I want this to get out. And so take it. Don't mention me. Don't credit me. Here's all my research. Here's all the documents. Here's everything that I have. Just take it and do whatever you want with it, but make sure that people know that this is what happened. I can disappear. I don't really care.
No.
Nothing.
Did you get a response from them?
Well, Alex is the only one who responded to me, and she said, yes, this is important. This is the security state. And even recently, I was in touch with her about Deborah Birx being from USAID, because all of a sudden people understand what that means. And so that was a good little in. But the minute I say, please help, please help, please help, what I mean is, please get the word out. I don't want help getting documents. I don't want help, with research, because now everybody's under the impression that this administration is somehow open with documents. They're not. And so I don't need help with that. All I need is get the information out to the public. And that's when there's like a wall of silence. Wall of silence.
And I mean, it's very hard to know what happened, because Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald and who was the third one you said?
Schellenberger.
Oh yes, Schellenberger. Mike Schellenberger. They are all very good journalists. First of all, it's hard to know if they even saw it, because they'll be inundated with emails.
Well,
they might not have seen it. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt. They might not have seen it.
Not at this point, no.
Well, it's not at this point. No, but
that was in 2022, end of 2022, probably, or beginning of 2023.
Oh no, I've been bugging them. You don't understand. I am very persistent and very stubborn. I would go on.
You did it over and over again.
I'm still doing it.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought it was just a one-off email. So you have been doing it regularly So by now, oh my God, there's another email by Debbie.
It's not even an email. I go on their public forums. I go on their response pages.
Okay.
I contact people who know them. There's just no way. It's not their beat. Okay. This is what I get, the response. It's not their beat. And I say, well, national security is their beat. They're busy, talking about January 6th or whatever, but between January 6th and now, a very big thing happened that they have not covered. And so whenever they go through their list of the most important national security things that have happened in the last century, and they talk about the war on terror, and they talk about Iraq, and they talk about the wars in the Middle East, and they talk about, all of the Trump psyops, and then they jump to Ukraine or something. And I say,
All right.
okay, there's a gap.
Yeah. So, okay, let's jump to the dossier, and I'm going to share it. One moment.
Oh, and the dossier also, I mean, I shared with everyone I just maniacally.
Me too.
Yeah, I know you did. And we actually, Sasha is right. I mean, Dr. Drew is a fantastic platform. Also, Neil Oliver was our biggest
in the UK.
And he was amazing.
Yeah, so Neil Oliver, GB News is also like sort of the highest mainstream we got internationally, is that. And he did an interview, and it was great.
And it got a lot of views.
Yeah, except the very interesting thing about it is, if you go on Google and you search for it, you can say Sasha Latipova, Debbie Lerman, Neil Oliver, and you can find it. If you go on YouTube and you search for it,
you won't find
you will never find it unless you have the direct link. So it is 100% shadow banned on YouTube.
Yes, I'm not surprised. There's a lot of still brutal censorship on YouTube, especially around this entire topic. Okay, so can you see it? Covid Dossier?
Yep.
Excellent. So this is now the updated. This is the expanded version. It's the adapted version. All right. Okay.
So we originally published what we had, and then I received so many comments and links from readers from all kinds of countries. Now we have pretty much every region of the world covered, and it points to exactly the same thing. So they confirmed a lot of things that we found. For example, one reader sent me a number of materials from Germany, and one interesting one was an article on the German Ministry of Defense website, Bundeswehr, and that article said that all of the COVID vaccines for Germany, but I suspect highly that it was also for
Europe.
For Europe, half of Europe was served from that one site. So there's a NATO site that German Ministry of Defense operates, and that's a logistics site. And so all of the vaccines for Germany and half of Europe came through that site. And obviously that site is used for shipping weapons and military supplies for NATO. And of course it avoids all import-export rules and transparency and so forth. And so they're admitting they've been shipping it like they're shipping weapons through NATO. And when I linked that article to the dossier and republished it, they removed it immediately from their website. Well, I found it archived and I relinked it.
Okay. Well, the new this age so-called vaccines are weapons too. So it makes sense to ship them through the same whatever that entity is they shipped it through. So it was taken down after you reported on it?
Yeah, German Ministry of Defense took down the article after I linked it to our dossier. And I found it on Wayback Machine and I relinked it.
Okay.
Yeah, people should know that also. And Sasha, I don't know if you've been doing this, and I need to do more of this, but have copies of everything. So because the Wayback Machine is also not reliable. But yeah, I was amazed. I asked Sasha, I said, Sasha, do you think they removed it because of the dossier or because of something else? And she said, because of the dossier.
it was so close, like that. Temporarily so associated. I'm like, why? Why? What's so important about today that you removed it?
Yeah, well, good that you point that out, because you will receive more links and more information from readers, hopefully, and they should know that they shouldn't just probably send the link and also store the link in the Wayback Machine.
That's
right.
But
they should also download. They should download it and save it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And another thing
All
I
right.
also sent to Debbie, Substack, after we published on February 4th, 2020, initially we published COVID Dossier. From that date, and so I've had my Substack now for 2.5 years or so. So from February 4th this year, 2025, the graph of my paid subs is, I lost over 100 subscribers, close to 200 paid subscribers. It just in the free fall. Even though my free subscribers are in the opposite direction, very steady growth, even accelerating on that date. So, and that has never happened since I had my Substack. I always had, so always the free numbers are always associated with growth in paid subs. It's normal. It's normal for any subscriber type business, right? And here we have them in opposite directions, right after that date. So right after I published it, I went on some do not promote, do not fund, defund list on Substack, and which is
So right after the COVID dossier was published.
Yep, exact date, total drop.
Is that true for you? Is that true for your Substack too, Debbie?
I have so few. I mean, I'm very small. I have right now I'm maybe at 6,000. But at the time we published, I was probably at 2,000 or 3,000, just even unpaid subscribers. And I only have 100 and something paid subscribers. So I'm not important enough right now for that to happen to me.
Mine is fairly large for Substack. I have 57,000 free subscribers, total subscribers in 191 countries in the world. So I have almost every country in the world. People are subscribing to me, and I have a large number of subscribers. I was ranked number 9 in science after several fake accounts, including number 1 ranked is from CDC. So I am important to them. So they, do not fund and demonetize list now.
And not only that, I discovered that on Sasha's list of top articles on Substack, so they have an algorithm where you can sort your articles by top, which ones have the most likes.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it ranks it according to likes, the ones that have the most likes, like the dossier, the one about the February 4th phone call, those ones are buried all the way down among, those have 1,000 likes or 800 likes. They're buried all the way down amongst the articles that have 200 likes. So there's a very, very intentional demotion and suppression of this information, even on Substack, which I'm pretty, I have to say, amazed that it gets that granular. They're getting very granular at suppressing it, Sasha.
Yes. Very targeted, very granular. They've developed algorithmic ways to fence in people that they don't want the message to get out. And so no matter how popular you say, and people approach me all the time, oh, you have such a huge platform. I'm like, okay, I have a platform, but guess what? They're creating these fenced in areas, echo chambers, where you only see certain people see you, and that's it. It doesn't get out.
Yeah.
So you originally published the COVID dossier on the 5-year anniversary when the coronavirus was designated as a national security threat. So, okay, so let's go and dive into this COVID. Maybe you just, who of you wants to just give a quick summary?
Well, Debbie, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to read the first paragraph because Sasha and I worked on it together. So the COVID dossier is a compilation of the evidence we have amassed over the last 3 years supporting the following claim. COVID was not a public health event, although it was presented as such to the world's population. It was a global operation coordinated through public-private intelligence and military alliances and invoking laws designed for CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, which also means weapons of mass destruction, attacks. So basically, this document is supposed to give the evidence for the claim that we've been making for several years now, so that people can't say, well, what's the evidence? How do you know it was a NATO operation? How do you know it was a military operation? Well, this is the evidence. And the evidence is from the United States, England, Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, France, Norway. So basically the Five Eyes countries, which is the English-speaking intelligence alliance, and NATO, those are the countries that we know the most about, but we also have a lot from South America. We don't have much from Africa because I think Africa was largely left out of it. as far as a military operation goes, or NATO, or any kind of military alliance. They also, thank God, were left alone and didn't get sick from the virus or get the vaccine. So thank God for that. But we have the evidence from NATO. I think the most shocking thing about this dossier and about what Sasha and I discovered as we were researching it is that NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the military alliance of the West. It's supposed to be protecting Western countries from foreign attacks and from terrorist attacks. That is the organization that was in charge of responding to a naturally occurring virus that was a danger to nobody. Okay? Yep. And so the conclusion of that, and I'm going to tell you a conclusion that I just recently, in the last few days, I came up with the wording that I think summarizes it. And somebody that I was talking to helped me to formulate this. NATO is now apparently, and I think this is true when we look at Ukraine and when we look at all the other NATO operations in the world right now, NATO is the mercenary army of a global crime cartel. That's what this dossier actually shows. Yep. NATO is the mercenary army of a global, and I'll add, technocratic and
banking and technocracy, yeah.
Technocratic crime cartel. Yeah. And you can say public-private partnership. I'm going to stop saying that because it's a lot of syllables. I'm going to start just saying cartel, global cartel.
Or
that's it. That's what NATO is.
Yeah, or you could also think of it as overlapping cartels. There are probably
overlapping cartels.
There are multiple. So there's a technocratic angle, there's banking angle, which Catherine Austin Fitz talks about.
Kind of including them all in one, but you're right. The banking,
overlapping, and they have overlapping interests, and sometimes they have fights among themselves and disagreements, such as, for example, currently the Trump administration claims that they're telling us the truth. Finally, it was a lab leak. They have a whole website set up for this, right? Lab leak. No longer it's a raccoon dog from the Chinese market, but a lab leak of dangerous China-made bioweapon, right? NATO currently on their website still says it's a raccoon dog. So sometimes there's the disconnect going on about how much they're lying and what about. But and so that just tells you these are different. There are different factions and stuff like that. But generally speaking, yes, it is a crime cartel that runs the world, and our military duty and the NATO are mercenary forces of those people.
And that's what this shows, and that's what COVID shows, and that's why the laws that talk about national security, and you'll see in this dossier, if you want to go down further, Cornelia, in every country we list the emergency declarations that were made and when they were made. Many of them unprecedented, and they were all.
I just want to stop here, Debbie, because I want to ask you something. So, so you talked about NATO, and all these NATO countries here, US, UK, Australia, Canada. And is there any NATO, all in NATO? All these are NATO
Five
countries.
Eyes on NATO, yeah.
Right. And I mean, Sweden didn't belong to NATO back then. Sweden joined NATO in March 2024. I don't know if you have Sweden in here.
No, because Sweden didn't have to do all the stuff. They did not have NATO obligations, as the Dutch health minister said. They did not have NATO obligations that they had to fulfill. They did have the vaccines. So in Sweden, the reason I think that they were able to pretty much not have lockdown, school closures, masks, none of that stuff, was because they were still going by public health protocols, pretty much. And also they're an extremely compliant population. And so when the vaccines came, they just all took them. They didn't need to be forced the way that, like, Americans weren't going to take them unless you forced them.
They did force Swedish quite a bit. There was a huge amount of.
Oh, did they force them? Okay.
It is true that a lot of people did it voluntarily because they are very compliant. But there also, I know Swedish politicians, and I went to Sweden several times. There was a huge amount of coercion,
Okay.
and I think so. So you're correct. Like, they did not do any of these lockdown and masking because they didn't have NATO obligations. But the vaccines, it came. I wrote a separate article about it. It came through the pan EU plan that Ursula von der Leyen implemented to tie in all the EU countries into this.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We also have to include the EU. So I'm sorry that we left that out. It's actually, the EU is also one of the alliances that was very active, very, very active in COVID. So NATO is overlapping with EU. But yeah, as you said, Sasha, there's a few countries that were left out of NATO, but they're in the EU. So
okay. So no, my question is this. You say here, we list the military intelligence agencies in charge of their country's COVID response. And the COVID response was really first initiated by China with the lockdowns. And then the rest of the world followed. So how does China figure into all of this? I don't see it here. What do you have any information about China? Was there any coordination with China? Why did all these NATO countries follow the crazy things that the Chinese regime did in Wuhan?
So first of all, China never locked down the whole country. Interestingly, China pretended that at the end of February, they had eradicated, and reached zero COVID by locking down the province that Wuhan is in, Hubei province, and some neighboring provinces, perhaps. They never locked down the whole country. But after February 2020, at the end of February, which we know is a very important time for us, because that's when it transitioned from China to us, all of a sudden, whenever you looked on our World in Data or any other data about case numbers and deaths, you would see in China, the curve would go up. And then on February 26th, whatever, 2020, when they stopped the lockdowns, the line was flat. So basically no deaths, no cases for 3 years in China, because they reached zero COVID in a country of 1 billion people that neighbors on like dozens of other countries where it was raging. But in China, there were zero cases and zero deaths for several years because their lockdowns worked. Now, that tells me that there was a lot of coordination between China and the West, because NATO and the other alliances that were trying to use the lockdown until vaccine paradigm, which is the national security paradigm. It is not a public health paradigm. They used China as a model in order to say, look, it worked in China.
Yeah.
Zero COVID was achieved and maintained for years.
Yeah. Well,
it's unbelievably absurd.
It's absurd, yeah. And in addition, China, it very much indicates that China was a willing player and a collaborator, even though publicly they're presented as enemy and have been for decades. By the way, this whole idea of blaming China for new viruses, that's not a recent thing. I'm currently reviewing U.S. bioweapons development programs when they had official one. And so I'm going back to the early 1900s. And since early 1900s, it's been a strategy of the Department of Defense to conduct various biological tests and operations in the U.S. And if things go bad, the number one thing you do is you blame China. You say there was a virus that evolved in China, and there was a pandemic, and therefore you guys have this abnormal sickness this year, right? So that strategy has been developed decades ago, and now China. Maybe at that time China was an adversary. Today, it's very clear China is a willing collaborator and partner. NIH awarded them money to make these models of viruses and test them in mice and do whatever in Wuhan. They took the money, they fulfilled the work as obligated. Also, they pre-manufactured all these fake videos that everyone used to scare population, right? So obviously they had other contracts in addition to Wuhan experiments. They had contracts from, I don't know, Hollywood, USAID, to make these videos of people falling dead in the streets, and maybe they're outtakes from some movies or something, but then all of the so when we're looking at the Western side, all these countries that are having these structures of, National Security Council orchestrating everything secretly. Right? So we found, for example, a very detailed description from Alberta, Canada. There was one of those, listening sessions. So Alberta, Canada premier a task with Jay Bhattacharya on it, by the way, to figure out how the communication flows were going on through this COVID pandemic in Alberta. And that task force, with participation of Jay Bhattacharya, could not figure it out. They said, oh, well, it goes up to security state, after which we don't have any answer. There's a stone wall. But what we know is they were all directed to follow the news from China and other places far away from the world, which nobody can verify, but ignore the local news and ignore the local.
That's right.
And that's a consistent thread everywhere.
And I just want to say about China, we even have a person. Now, we don't have a dossier on China because it's a black box for us. We don't have documents from there. We don't speak Chinese, and we didn't do any research on their documents. And also because all of their stuff happened before us. So they were used as the prototype for the lockdowns and the vaccines. But we do have George Gao. So George Gao, he's the equivalent of the CDC or the HHS director in China, has participated for decades in every pandemic planning event 201 and all the other ones. George Gao is right there. China is an active participant in the global biodefense public-private partnership. That's just a fact. I mean, you can see it in all of the meetings that they have where they're discussing bioweapons and countermeasures. Gao is always there, and Chinese scientists are always there. Wuhan had people working from China and from everywhere else, in the world, from many Western, not everywhere else, but other Western countries. So there has been a collaboration on biodefense, on all of this stuff with China for decades. And I agree with, and then there's also this tendency to blame China because that's a really easy way to get people riled up and to get them distracted from the fact that it was actually our own government that was doing it.
Yeah.
Yes. And that too. Okay, go ahead.
Just to add to the public-private partnership with the Chinese, so the thing that I did find about Chinese participation in the COVID vaccines is that Pfizer and BioNTech is not a two-party alliance; it's a three-party alliance. So for China, there is a third participant, is Fosun Pharmaceuticals, and Fosun Pharmaceuticals it's part of a huge conglomerate of Fosun parent company, which owns 20-some different companies with premier brands all over the world. And so Fosun Pharmaceuticals is a huge pharma company in China. And it was a three-way alliance, BioNTech, Pfizer, Fosun, which was structured right before it. So it was, I have the dates, but something like late 2018, early 2019. They structured this alliance by which they can share IP and share data, importantly. So, for example, while there's no direct sharing between US and China, there is sharing between US BioNTech to China. So like the data can travel to China via BioNTech, and they share IP rights, and Fosun can manufacture these mRNA shots in China, these BioNTech mRNA shots in China. And so that alliance was structured in somewhere between 2018 and 2019. Then Bill Gates invested like in August of 2019. He's such a great investor. And then U.S. Department of Defense awards this alliance $10 billion to make COVID vaccines. So how is this like National Security Council, national security threat? China is our enemy that can attack us with bioweapons. And we give alliance where gigantic Chinese pharma company, which is, by the way, controlled by CCP, because their chairman of the board of the Fosun is a very, very high-ranking CCP member. And so this CCP-controlled company gets billions of dollars from the U.S. Department of Defense. It's just amazing how these things happen.
Yeah.
The mRNA vaccines, were they ever made available to the Chinese population?
Yes, they now have both Pfizer and Moderna. So Fosun can sell them, and Moderna also, they've entered a partnership sometime in early 23, I think they entered partnership with Moderna to make mRNA shots there.
Do you know how many how many of the population in China got these shots?
I don't know. We don't have any data, and you can't trust Chinese data. So I mean, they were showing this, zero COVID, and they just make up numbers. Like you can't trust any of that.
Right.
Yeah, but there's no doubt of the collaboration and the cooperation, I think, are indisputable.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I agree. And as you said, they collaborated in all these numerous tabletop exercises. So they were all on board for that.
And I'm going to throw something out. I'm just going to throw something out there because I did have an interview, and I can't say with whom, but somebody who is now in the Trump administration, who pointed out to me that George Gao's wife, apparently, who I cannot find any information about at all, she doesn't exist online, is a very important sort of biodefense Chinese operative. So if anybody's out there and wants to investigate that, that's a little data point that I've always wanted to follow up on.
Okay. So Debbie, I think it was you who said that China was a willing player, and okay, but so it's a very interesting situation. You have all this evolving stuff here in around February, March, and then in China, where the virus began in Wuhan, you have a situation where the CCP decides to shut down to lock down the population in this enormous city. I mean, Wuhan is in a small city. Many millions of people in the city are being locked down in a brutal way. And that's unprecedented. And the Western countries follow suit. They said, "Oh well, this was a great idea, and we are going to do."
Interestingly, Cornelia, before February 27th, they were actually saying, "Oh my God, can you believe what those totalitarian Chinese are doing? It's terrible. They're locking."
Who was saying that? Government officials?
The Western media. They were saying, "Look at that! They're cementing their people into their houses. They're not they're starving them. It's terrible. We would never do that. We would never do such a thing." They were saying that. And then all of a sudden, they switched to saying, "Oh, look, they got zero COVID. Oh, we better do the same thing."
And a lot of prominent people who are now shoved in front of us as freedom leaders were saying things like, "We didn't lock down hard enough." Right. So just to remind people that your freedom leaders that you are promoting today, look back to what they were saying back then. Who was wearing bandanas on their faces and saying that we all need to be masked and we didn't lock down hard enough, and look, China achieved zero COVID. All of those people were saying those things.
Right. So the media changed their tune, most likely because of all these strange changes that we just observed, and that are detailed in the PAN cap and other things. So they changed their tune, and the official policies of all these NATO countries here was to follow China's policies and lock down their population. Now, you say China is a willing player. Now, for China, of course, or for the CCP rather, for the CCP's goal is to dominate the world.
No,
that's their goal. I mean, it's their stated goal. They talk about it openly.
No.
And
no. It's not.
That's not their goal.
Well, let me just.
Yeah, China has never. If you think about it, look at the history of China. China has never. They have never invaded any other country.
Ever in all the thousands of years that they were an empire, that they were the biggest power in Asia. Never. That is not their goal. Their goal is to be an empire and to be and that's it.
They do claim that they are. Well, they used to claim that they are the center of the universe, and in the olden times, that's their mentality. Is we are the main empire of the world. We're the center of the world, but that has never translated into invasion. Even they did have a strong navy at some point, and they still did not invade anyone. They've always been a huge land mass, That is, and once you have huge land mass, guess what? You don't have resources to actually go invade somebody. You need to focus on your land, and that's how they've been operating for thousands of years. So they never have these ambitions of dominating the world, but they are a strong force, and they want to be respected, and they want to be treated as they treat themselves, as we're the kings.
Yeah. No.
Not only
well, no,
that, they have achieved an economic miracle in their country
Yeah.
in terms of how they used capitalism in a centralized capitalism, basically they became global capitalist players without actually having a democratic system, in order to lift their entire population out of abject poverty. Now they're just in bad poverty. But the economic miracle that happened in China, again, was not because they went and took resources from other countries. They got other countries to send everything over to them. And it wasn't because they went and invaded, or they went and tried to militarily control anything. Not at all. They did it through economically.
Yeah, they did it economically. They did it by doing a great job, in manufacturing, in design, now they're moving up the stack into more sophisticated technologies. They did an amazing job, and they said, "Hey, hire us," and everybody hired.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a very different view on that. I think when you look at China, I mean, look at how they. I think they absolutely want to conquer other people. Like, look at Tibet, what they did to the Tibetans. Look at what they did to the Muslim populations that they have. Look at what they did in Mongolia. Look at their interest in taking over Taiwan. Look at what they're doing to the Philippines now for decades. So they're clearly aggressive. But
those are all Chinese territories. So that yes, they are aggressive in their territories, right?
But okay, well, I think the people who live there would fundamentally disagree with that. But in any case, China is the enemy of the United States.
Stated it, but we've just described how they're partners.
I know. I mean, correct. So, but I think China, the CCP, would certainly regard the United States as their main enemy. So for them to collaborate, or to be a willing player, or to be something that looks like a willing player, you ask yourself what play they are really playing here and what is going on. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the infiltration of the Canadian military, for example, or Canada as a society and as a gateway into the United States. And you're probably also aware of the infiltration of the United States by the CCP, by all sorts of CCP agents that are sent over here, and
we sent
the only reason that people are
so
they are all sent over here. They're sent over here to get our technology and to get our knowledge, and they do a really good job of that. So they steal technology, they steal everything.
They steal everything.
That's not because they're our enemy. They view if we are their biggest market, if we cut off ties with China, both us and China would immediately collapse, because we get everything from China and they sell everything to us. We are completely mutually dependent. We did that. Our global elites in the West did that by outsourcing everything to China because they wanted cheap labor and cheap manufactured goods. They destroyed us, destroyed Western society by outsourcing us to China. And China's the winner in that for sure, but they don't hate us. They love us.
And so
well, I would say they need us. I don't think they love us. But before I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I just wanted to we shouldn't talk about it too long because there's so much in the dossier and it has nothing to do with China. I just wanted to point out that China, another country that is missing here is Russia. I don't know if you found out anything about Russia and
Russia did everything the same way. They did maybe not as much brutality, but they did have coercion. They used the vaccines that they use as a knockoff of AstraZeneca. So it's the same exact technology, same materials as AstraZeneca. It's just as toxic. Russian people, because I know and I have a bunch of friends and I read Russian publications. The thing is, like, Russians are very astute people because living under communism teaches you that. Most of the Russians did not want Russian-made vaccine, and not because they were all like aware of COVID. A lot of them were deluded, just like, about the same percentage of the population was deluded about this whole COVID. They just don't trust homemade stuff, and they trust foreign stuff. So everyone was lining up for Pfizer and Moderna. So if you look at the numbers, they're barely any Sputnik was used, and so everybody who ran to get vaccinated wanted to get vaccinated with Pfizer and Moderna. If you could get availability, then some people got the local made stuff. But there was no difference. And the reason Russia did all of this is not because of NATO and not because of EU, but because of they're beholden to the central banks. So the banking alliance forced them into this. And so,
Okay, all right. Okay, so we talked about the NATO countries, EU, and also, of course, we have United Nations and WHO, which I think is coming towards the bottom of the dossier. So I'm just going to scroll down because I want to get to some of the. We already talked about the PrEP Act, we talked about CBRN, we talked about the EUA. So we talked about the tape. You can actually listen to it here.
Yep.
This is nice. And then, okay, call to action, Covid Dossier. So here, this is the Covid Dossier US. So you parcel it up into different regions, different countries. Yep. So let's go. So we already know a lot about the US. So maybe we can skip this. What do you think?
Well, what we can do is we can say, look, we already talked about all of this. Let's keep in mind the whole point of the dossier is if we could have put it side by side, that would have been perfect, because then we would have had the US and every other country. And then you could have seen. So the whole point of this is, let's remember, in the United States, it was National Security Council, DHS, and DOD. Let's remember that the declarations of emergency were on March 13th and March 18th. Let's remember all these things, and then let's look at the other countries and see if they did the same thing.
Okay.
So that's the point of it. Okay, so let's remember all of this and let's move on to the other countries.
Yes. So you know what you really need here for your Covid Dossier? You need a real website, not just with something where you scroll down, but a website where you can where you can jump to different places, and where you have a really nice architecture where it's easily accessible and you get a good overview.
That's a really good point, Sasha. If we had like a map that you could click on, that would be really good.
We should probably maybe find somebody who can make us a website.
Yeah.
Because that's not my skill.
No, me neither.
Okay, but so you have these subsections: military intelligence agencies that were in charge, the dates when they were known to be in charge, and then you can actually click on all these references and find more information. And then the dates of the emergency declarations, which we are familiar with by now. And then the agencies involved in public communications, propaganda, censorship. And then also, yes, the key figures in COVID responses linked to military intelligence community. So there's Deborah Birx, which we talked about, but then also people we haven't talked about. So you can go in here and look at all this.
Yeah. And this is the reason we included these people. I don't like talking about specific people because I think it's more important to focus on the system, but we wanted to make it clear that it's not Fauci. And we wanted to make it clear that it wasn't one person. And we also wanted to make it clear that it's a whole bunch of people you never heard of.
Right. For example, this guy, I don't know who he is, Carter Mesher. Okay, let's have a look at him.
Yeah, so you will read this is my article about Michael Lewis's book, which is called The Premonition, in which Carter Mesher stars. And Carter Mesher, it turns out, is a very classified biodefense CIA operative, which I found out by researching him. And the reason I researched him is because he's in this book. And in this book, Michael Lewis claims that he's just an old doctor from the VA living in Georgia, doing his thing, not really caring about anything, but somehow he was in charge of the pandemic response. somehow,
Okay.
miraculously. So you have to read a lot in order to get, because these people are all classified. They're all, CIA. It's not like there's a lot of references that say, "Hi, I'm a CIA agent who was in charge of COVID."
Mhm.
No, probably not. Okay, so then we have now we come to the section Covid Dossier UK, and here you see the same structure: the agencies in charge, the dates when they were known to be in charge, emergency declarations, and now all this is of course somewhat different. They have the Ministry of Defense. Yeah, just walk me through this for the
So
UK, just briefly, just to
as
get an idea.
it's an example, yeah. So Ministry of
Yeah.
Defense is Department of Defense. COVID Support Force is, they always create like the task force. Joint Biosecurity Center is the military intelligence agency that they created in order to be in charge of the COVID response. So there you go. It's a lot of it comes from a testimony that was given to the Parliament of the UK.
So this is, look at this here. I mean, this already is very interesting. This is from the Ministry of Defense. It's from parliament.uk. Defense contribution to the UK's pandemic response. Okay, and then you can read what did the defense contribute? What did they do? How were they in charge? So, okay, all right, interesting. And they have this joint biosecurity center.
So that's the most important body that they created. Now that is actual intelligence linked operation. So basically, ISAGE is a different organization, but every country had this exact same structure where they created a COVID specific military intelligence sub-agency to be in charge, just like the task force. So some of these are paywalled, unfortunately.
Yeah,
and
can also put.
That's an article that I wrote with all of the evidence that it was a biodefense response.
Senior spy appointed to lead UK's joint biosecurity centers. Here we go. Yeah, senior spy is in charge.
Senior spy appointed to lead UK's joint biosecurity center. So that's the headline.
And they have these, like, another thing they have is these Easter eggs, haha. I pointed people to, there was so Robert Malone was involved in putting on the market remdesivir. He was given $20 million grant from DTRA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, to make a fake study and rubber stamp remdesivir. It was called Domain. Now, in addition to that, he was also part of this Quantum Leap CRO, on which Janet Woodcock and two other women from the FDA are on the board. The trial where they were trialing these, remdesivir and a few other drugs in people was called iSpy. Okay, so it was called iSpy. The webpage is still up. The cover page for this iSpy trial has probably AI-generated image, slightly Hispanic-looking Robert Malone. Okay, on it. No reason.
When were they running this?
They were running it in 2020. So I remember when they had this whole effort of, we're going to repurpose drugs and we're going to look at. So Domain was a computer modeling exercise which Robert Malone ran right away, like right in January or February of 2020. He was such a busy man. He was running this trial to model, responses to different receptors by different drugs. Somehow, miraculously, out of hundreds of drugs that they profiled, remdesivir was the front runner, but also ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, I think, and a couple of others, famotidine. And then after this modeling exercise, these things went into this iSpy trial in people by this Quantum Leap CRO, on which FDA, Janet Woodcock and FDA are board members. So,
wow.
And I'm just going to add one thing to that. In January 2020, Robert Malone said that Michael Callahan, and if you look at our list of people under the US who were, you'll see Michael Callahan. He told Robert Malone, DARPA's man in Wuhan, he told Robert Malone, according to Robert Malone, in January 2020, shift all of your operations to the novel coronavirus. So basically, in January 2020, very, very early. So when you say, Sasha, that they started early, that's how early they started. Now, he got in big trouble for that. And one of the links, Cornelia, that you'll see under his name is actually a link to Robert Malone's book, where he says, I was told not to talk anymore about Michael Callahan in China in January 2020.
Yeah, so Michael Callahan was, for some reason, well, we know why, he was in Wuhan in January. He called Robert Malone, bragged about it early on as a badge of credence, that Michael Callahan called him from Wuhan, told him to spin up his team. Spin up his team. Michael Callahan happens to be a CIA agent. He's an infectious disease doctor. He is on every outbreak out there, every infectious disease outbreak. He's Indiana Jones of CIA. And
Ebola,
Zika, you name it. He's always in this garb, this ridiculous garb that they wear to pretend that these are super dangerous things. And this guy. And he's everywhere. So in Wuhan, he was testing the hospital murder protocol, in my opinion, and found the exact sequence of steps, killed a bunch of people, and then that was imported into the US with remdesivir.
Okay, that's conjecture. I'm just going to add, Sasha, that's not in the dossier.
Not in the dossier. This is my personal opinion. My personal opinion. What he was doing there, he was finalizing the hospital murder protocol with remdesivir and ventilators, starvation, dehydration, isolation, all the BS and gaslighting of the family members. And then he called and he said, we're all ready to go. We're good. We got our beautiful, he had some flowery language that he used to describe this beautiful infectious virus. And so it was all ready to go.
Right.
So there you go. So every person on this list has that much of a story behind them that nobody knows about.
Okay, so for the UK, let's see whom you have here. Well, you have a lot of information about the UK, it seems.
Yeah.
You have there's a national lockdown, very similar dates, coronavirus. They have a coronavirus act. You can read at that. So they passed some legislation, I guess.
Yep. So the legislation, it's very interesting. It's called the Coronavirus Act. It is not a public health act. As you can see, it's an emergency declaration that says we can lock down and close anything at any time for any amount of time for any reason.
There we go. Emergency arrangements concerning medical practice arrangements.
So because the UK is back, it's like a bunch of it's Ireland and Wales and Scotland and England. So they have to have everything 5 times, for all their different regions, but it's all the same.
Okay. Let's go back here. There's the famous nudge unit, behavioral insights team.
Interestingly, the nudge unit, which was a government unit, is now privatized. So now it's a public-private partnership.
It's private. It's privatized, but it gets money from the government.
It's not just privatized; it's privatized and internationalized. So now they have it in many countries, and it is funded by many governments.
By many governments.
Yeah.
Institute for Government. So that's
institute. Right.
Is that the prize? Is that the name?
Institute
that's the name of the.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So there are a number of these. They have these coin names like institute. So Battelle, for example, this DoD outfit, it's supposedly a private corporation. It's also called institute, but it's basically a DoD arm coordinating their grants into various biodefense technologies and other defense technologies.
Yeah.
So is that one of these quasi-governmental?
Quasi-governmental.
Yeah. Well, at this point on this website, it says that it's governmental. If you go to the next link under Nudge Unit, you'll see that it is then all of a sudden where it says now fully owned. Now it's the UK's Innovation Agency for Social Good. Oh, wow. We transformed it.
That's the name of Nesta. We are Nesta.
Yeah.
Innovation Agency for Social Good.
So good,
Okay.
yeah. I love these Orwellian, names that they give themselves. It's priceless.
Yeah, sustainable. That's fair, sustainable, healthy.
Uh-huh.
And get a heat pump. Get a heat pump. Yes. They're forcing the heat pumps on this German population.
Uh-huh.
It's not just get one.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you better get one. Okay, and then let's see. There are the keys, figures. All right. Then you have Australia again. Lots of information, quite a bit of information here as well. Key figures. You have Canada. If there's anything particularly interesting, tell me, and I'll go into it.
Okay.
Anything that stands out? The Canadian Armed Forces here, CAF Operation Vector, vaccine planning distribution. Was that also managed by the army?
Military? Yeah.
By the military.
Yeah, it was the military. So, let's see. In Canada, the interesting thing is that the cabinet committee. So just to point out that in every country there was something called a cabinet committee. March 4th. It's always at the beginning of March. And that's the committee that they formed, just like the task force on February 28th, which moved to OVP. Remember, we saw that in the document. February 28th, March 4th. In those dates, that's when these special committees were formed, or at least were made public. And they were the ones who were advising the politicians on what to do. And they were all advising them, in terms of military intelligence. It had nothing to do with public health. And that's why the Alberta committee or investigation of the COVID response couldn't figure out where the information was coming from, because those committees were getting their marching orders from NATO, and they were getting their marching orders through the WHO and the UN, like that. Those were just like the sort of coordination mechanisms to coordinate and to disseminate the orders to everyone. And so it had nothing to do with what was happening in Alberta, obviously. It didn't have anything to do with what was happening anywhere on the ground. It only had to do with whatever the centralized global response was going to be. Yeah, whole of government,
whole of government leadership, coordination, preparedness. Yeah, we came across that before. The whole of government. So you should
every single one of these websites will say whole of government.
Yes. Whole of government
and whole of society and whole
of society. Yes. So so first of all, whole of government is the language of war, because it's the only time, and in war meaning you are invaded on your domestic territory. Okay, so. And it's the only time that's, reasonable is when you actually at war, somebody is trying to invade you or invaded you. And that's used to suspend the Constitution, because that's the only sort of justified manner in which Constitution is suspended is the country is at war, right? So here they're using the same language and telling people it's a public health event. So they're telling we've suspended the Constitution. By the way, I also profiled many interviews from press events from Pentagon. They're still on DoD website, and in these press events throughout 2020, the military in charge of this response, including General Talley, Colonel Wendy Simons Jackson, there was Michaels. I forget, Dr. Michaels, I think, and there was another one, I forget his name, it's a very complicated name. It was a person from WHO. So these people repeat whole of government like it's a spell. Okay, so I cut one hour press event. I cut the clip of them saying whole of government. It was said 11 times within the span of 1 hour. They repeated whole of government 11 times.
Yeah, and you also find that on the United Nations documents, WHO documents.
And again, I think what we have to highlight, which is exactly the same as saying that it's a national security threat. It is a legal, they're using it without telling us as a legal framework. So the reason they keep repeating it is because that's the legal framework that we are now operating under. And that legal framework is extra constitutional. It's the same thing as national security threat. It's like now we're no longer under the Constitution. Now we're under a state of war, and in a state of war and in a state of emergency, different rules apply. And there's definitely no regulations or oversight to anything that has to do with countermeasures. And there's also no legal recourse, by the way, if you want to challenge the state of emergency, or if you want to challenge the measures that are being imposed under the state of emergency, there's also no legal recourse for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, just tangentially, just another piece of evidence for this. They did brief some of the parts of the judicial system were definitely in the know. For example, in J6 detainees, I know there was an account from one of the people who was detained. He's himself a police officer. He was at the Capitol, and he was arrested. He's himself police officer, so he knows his rights. When he was brought in front of the judge, and he said, I have a right to speedy trial and fair trial, and I'd like to, get a speedy trial so I can defend myself. The judge told him that the amendment of the Constitution that ensures that has been suspended because of COVID-19. Well, of course, you can't suspend a single amendment of the Constitution, which means the entire Constitution was suspended. And the judiciary knew about it. So this particular judge who was processing the J6 defendants knew about it and told it to this person.
Yeah, that's the legal system is a whole nother layer that needs to be investigated. Like, how are these things, how is the Constitution suspended? The states invoked emergency laws that were intended, again, for CBRN attacks. And those emergency laws were not intended to be used for years and years on end, and to give the governor exclusive powers. Like, they basically gave the governor, like he was a king whenever that was declared. So states also suspended everything when they declared those states of emergencies.
Right. Yeah. Look at this here. I just saw that CAF began to gather intelligence on pandemic disinformation in January 2020. They were ahead of their times.
Well, so did the
January 2020.
WHO. So did so did everybody.
Yeah.
So did the Stanford Internet Observatory. They all started in January.
Yeah. So they all enabled and massively funded the censorship and suppression and propaganda operations, and they were all also military units. Plus, the USA defunded things like, Stanford Internet Observatory, which is ostensibly a private thing, but it's actually a military arm, a CIA arm. Anyway, so there were numerous of these activities, the 77th Brigade in the UK, all of these censorship operations online, the numerous, the thousands of bots on Twitter who would just swarm and mass report anyone. And that's how I got...
Wait, stop. Wait, Cornelia, go back for a second. There's something really interesting. So if you actually click on these things, you'll find so much incredible information, but it's a lot. That's why it took us a long time to put this together. So look at where it says, keep going down. It says, for over 7 decades, Canada and some of its closest allies, this is the Five Eyes, have operated a largely secret formal exchange of military medical intelligence. Military medical intelligence. That means biodefense and biowarfare intelligence through QMIC. So QMIC is another body through which they coordinate and share this kind. So there's all of these alliances. There's memoranda of understanding that say things like, if one country is attacked by a bioweapon or bioterrorism, we're all going to respond. We're all going to share information. We're all going to share countermeasures. We're all going to share the legal framework under which those countermeasures are not regulated, that kind of thing.
Interesting. And then it says here, this relationship regularly produces troves of highly detailed data and insights, most of it written by the US military on emerging health threats around the globe. So that sounds like the U.S. military was mainly in charge here.
They were in charge of fabricating all these stories about threats and biothreats and Gulf viruses and outbreaks and how they're going to travel by plane. Even though we had like about 100 years of civil aviation and millions of flights and nothing ever traveled from anywhere to anywhere. But U.S. military, see, they have a lot of money, and they also have a lot of Hollywood writers who also need these gigs to write these kinds of scripts and share with everyone.
Written extensively on the history of medical intelligence.
Mhm.
That is interesting. Okay, so then we have Netherlands.
So Netherlands
another
is very
another NATO
important. And I'm
country.
just going to point out,
Okay.
Netherlands is important because that's what triggered this dossier. So I had been thinking about trying to compile an international record for a long time, but it's really hard. You know, it's easier from the English-speaking countries because we can read the documents, and because we have a lot of FOIAs that have been done in those countries that I could actually read. But in the Netherlands, when the information came out about the minister, the health minister, saying that the government during COVID was fulfilling its NATO obligations and that the intelligence was in charge, I looked it up and I saw that there were some really amazing Dutch researchers, again, citizen researchers who FOIA'd the government. The Dutch government is very meticulous about documentation. And so they were able to obtain documents that showed, again, that it was the military and intelligence, that the intelligence agencies were in charge of, it's the National Court, it's the NCTV. So that's the Dutch agency that was in charge. They were in charge not just of the policy, same as the National Security Council. They were in charge of the messaging. They were in charge of the propaganda and the censorship. And so they had documents that showed all of that. And so that's what made me think, like, okay, we have the US, we have the UK, and we have Canada and Australia, and now we also have that. And at the same time, the Robert Koch Institute, RKI, leaks came out in Germany. And the RKI leaks in Germany, which Sasha wrote about, which then I also, those two things, the Dutch and the German, triggered this. They showed that, again, in Germany, it was not a public health response. The public health agency was being instructed by somebody else. Who was that somebody else? Well, there's hints that it was NATO. NATO generals were participating in these meetings and saying that everything had to be classified. Christian Drosten is one of the leaders of the Global Biodefense Public-Private Partnership. He was in charge of the PCR test, getting it through without any, he got it through peer review in January 2020 without any peer review because it happened in less than 24 hours. The person who pointed that out is now living in a jungle in Brazil because that person, I'm not kidding.
Is that where I feel safe?
Probably. Oh, Debbie,
Debbie, are you muted?
Oops. Oh, I think we lost.
Oh, she disappeared. Oh my God. She'll come back. I'm going to stop sharing this for a second. Let's see.
Yeah, she's back.
She'll be back.
Okay.
She'll be back. So until she comes back, Sasha, I'm going to ask you, when you looked, oh no, she's coming back. So she can, oh, hi, Debbie. There you are. Welcome back. I thought you had left for the Brazilian jungle right there. Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes.
So what I want to ask you, yes, we can hear you. Okay. So now when you looked at all these different countries and all their documents and all their arrangements and all this stuff, did you see that same flip from, kind of like normal in, I don't know when, probably January 2020, it's this flip between early February and end of March, because we see the same days over and over and over again.
Yes.
Exactly
the same. And then
you can even look at their newspapers and their news media. You can see what they were saying. You can see what Boris Johnson, for instance, was saying. He was saying, we're not going to give in to fear. We are not like that. We're not going to do any of these things. This was in, early mid-February. He was saying that. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he went out and said, like, we're in war. We're at war. Uh-huh. We're at war with the virus. We need to fight a war.
Remember Nancy Pelosi was making a show in the San Francisco, China neighborhood, saying, "Oh, you need to hug Chinese people and be friends with them," and
Right, because everybody was because it was the China virus, so everybody was afraid of Chinese restaurants.
Yeah, so she was doing this like show in San Francisco to hug Chinese people. And
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, but really, if you listen to the leaders and to the media in all of these countries, you will see that they had the identical sort of propaganda trajectory. So at first it was just a public health event. They were treating it like a public health event. We weren't going to do anything major, and it wasn't a big threat. And then all of a sudden, boom, it just switched.
Okay, so going back in here, so we have the COVID dossier for Italy. We have
Let's just talk
the
about Italy, and then we don't really have to talk about everything, but let's just move on
okay,
Italy maybe, because in Italy, what's interesting is that they also did a lot of citizen investigations and FOIAs, and they have a document showing that there was a NATO general involved in the meetings that were classified by the military intelligence, group that was in charge, and that it was a NATO operation. So that's actually where that and Germany and a few other places have specific references to NATO. I don't want to overstate that we know who was the NATO general in charge of, the response in every country. We don't know that. But we do know from various countries that they were involved.
okay, yeah, you have a lot of information
And
here
the
for
there's
Italy.
one more interesting thing about Italy. So they were very, very early on involved because they had to fake that northern Italy outbreak. So the way that it happened was first they did the cruise ship, and then they did northern Italy, and then they did New York. So they had to do it was a series of increased panic propaganda. And so they did the panic propaganda on the ship was kind of low level during February. Then at the end of February, they're like, boom, northern Italy. And I have documentation showing that the Department of Defense on their timeline said there's a huge outbreak in Italy on the date when there was nothing happening in Italy at all. But that's when they started testing people and saying, oh my God, there's a big outbreak in Italy. So on February 5th, which is the day after February 4th, and we all know that February 4th is the important date when the national security threat was declared to the companies in the United States, I mean globally, and also the PrEP Act. February 5th in Italy, this is very early compared to other countries. The committee that is the task force, that is the military intelligence committee, was formed in Italy. So it was formed on February 5th, the day after all of this stuff went into effect in the United States. So they were very, very closely allied and aligned in their timeline with the United States. But because their outbreak had to happen before our outbreak, they were a little bit ahead of us in terms of the timing.
Okay. All right. And I want to remind everyone again that these dates, like February 2020, all this, you can see where everything is being kicked in, all this military involvement everywhere in all these countries. We are talking about, like, there is no threat. There's nothing. There's not a single death in the United States. There's maybe a couple of cases here and there.
Right.
There's no raging pandemic anywhere in sight.
Anywhere in sight.
That's just the amazing thing, right? I mean, you look at this, you look at this like a kind of militarization around the globe. For what exactly? It's just surreal. So gosh, I still feel like we're just scratching the surface, but at least people now have an idea what's in the COVID dossier. But I think let me just stop the screen sharing for now. I think we have looked at this for now long enough. But what I would like to do, if you're up for it, I would like to have a third interview with you about the COVID dossier, because I want to go back in there and talk about a few things in Germany, because I know a little bit since I grew up there, what was happening there. And then also I would like to go further down in your document where you have other resources as well. I also want to talk through how people should contact you if they want to add information, what the process is for that, and some other things. I also want to discuss the whole topic with you. Why on earth were they setting up this entire thing?
That's a long conversation.
So that's a long conversation in itself. So why was it? We are now getting an idea of what was happening. We still don't understand why it was happening. So I want to talk about that. And then also, what does that mean for the future? What's going to happen in the future?
Mhm.
And that, yeah, why don't we do that? I don't know, maybe next month?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
That's very, yeah, because I still think that this is absolutely, it's overwhelming. And I also I found some really interesting documents that I now didn't have time to share, but I want to show them in our next interview that I found through your COVID dossier that I want to go
Okay.
in and discuss with you.
Well, thank you for being so detailed, because what people do is they look at the dossier and they just see a list of stuff and it doesn't really hit them what it means, I think, unless you look at the links and you look at the information. I mean, the point of it is actually to hit you just with the list. I mean, I think personally the list is terrifying. But if you don't really understand the significance of the list, it really helps Cornelia to do what we did, which is look at some of the documents and understand what the significance is of the list. But I just also want to say, so up to now we've been talking about, and Sasha and I worked hard to make this a factual document that leaves out our opinions about why. And so when we have a discussion about why, it's not going to be based on documentation necessarily, because we don't know what the motives are of these people or these organizations or this global crime cartel. And so we kind of have to guess. So that's kind of leading us into a more speculative discussion, which is great.
Yes, and fair enough. But at least that's a big why, right? And I mean, for you, it's a super big why because you did all this research. So why on earth was all this done? There must be some sort of reason to engage in all these activities and build up all these structures and do all this and subject the populations to what they were subjected to. So it's the why is everywhere. And I think we should at least try our best to go into it. And for the people, so when I first looked at the dossier, I thought, oh yeah, wow, this is overwhelming. I don't have time to really look at all this. So I looked at a few things. I clicked on this link and that. But so what I would encourage people to do is choose a region that you're particularly interested in. Maybe you have Italian ancestries, or you maybe you don't know anything about what happened in the US. So start there. That's a good place to start. But maybe you are from Latin America and you want to know what happened in, I don't know, Argentina or who knows. And then also I would like to encourage people. There must be a lot of knowledge out there, because especially in the United States, because people are from all over the place, and they will know about their own country, maybe more than about, where they came from. So encourage people to contact you. How are you best contacted? Through your Substacks? Or
yeah.
How? Okay, you can sign up for free to their Substacks. And once you're signed up, how can they get in touch with you? Leave a comment.
Well, they will be
on the dossier.
right. So they can call. I read all the comments and I respond to pretty much all the comments. They can also email. So they will be receiving emails from us with our published articles, so they can reply to the email. And
also there's a way.
Oh yeah, you can reply to the email when an article. I didn't know that. So that will reach. That will be read by you. Okay.
Even easy. You can even go and just request. You can click on a chat or whatever, and you can just say something and
there's direct messaging also. Yeah,
direct messaging. Just direct message us on Substack. You don't have to give the information. You can say, hey, I just want to contact you, and we'll give you a way to contact us by email, by secure, whatever secure channel you want.
And you don't need a paid subscription to do that. Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful then. Yeah, so that's what I would encourage people to do. Contact you and supply the information you have to build this out, because I think this is great, but I also think it's just a start. It's probably just a very small portion of what's really out there.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, you have a better idea. I mean, you did all the research. I'm just talking here. But do you think that's true?
The reason I'm laughing is because it's such an overwhelming amount of information, and I'm so tired of it, Cornelia. I'm so tired of it. It's like, I know what happened. Okay, I might not know why. I might not know the motivations of every single person. We can speculate about that. I think Sasha and I have done enough work to show what happened, and I'm very, very tired of people of nobody being interested and nobody, the knowledge not being widely available.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated. And that's why I'm laughing, because I'm just so frustrated by it.
It's what we want to see, what I think the message is, and especially, okay, so the diluted side or enemy side, I don't care. But the health freedom side, they also, for the most part, ignore this. And for the most part, they keep speaking about COVID as a public health event, as if, if we publish yet another study in peer-reviewed journal, then that will change the FDA's mind and they will remove the. This will never happen because this is a military operation. So we're in a totally different.
Well, the other thing, Sasha, and I'm going to follow up on that for precisely what has been happening with the Trump administration, which again is the same as the Biden administration in this, doing the same thing. So when they publish a CDC page, and the entire health freedom movement is ecstatic because the CDC page no longer refers to like COVID, statistics. Now it refers to Donald Trump saying it's a China virus and it was done in a lab, and let's blame EcoHealth Alliance and let's blame Fauci, because it was a public health event that happened because a virus leaked from Wuhan that was subsidized by the NIH. No, it was not subsidized by the NIH. It was subsidized by DOD and the CIA. That's who subsidizes all the biodefense research. Then they say, oh, and we're going to cut off research. NIH is going to oversight by the NIH. The NIH has no oversight over bioweapons labs. Exactly. So again, it's like you're talking about nothing. You're talking about an achievement that is not just empty, it is distracting you from what really happened. So if you tell me, but it's still important to stop gain of function research, then I'll say to you, but you haven't done that, and you haven't addressed the fact that that is bioweapons research. The NIH has nothing to do with it. Nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing. It is not a public health endeavor. If you want to stop gain of function research, go to the DOD and go to the CIA and go to the bioweapons experts in the DOD and the CIA and tell them they can't do this research. Otherwise, you've not only done nothing, you've done worse than nothing, because you're covering it up inadvertently because you want to be happy and you want to feel like, our people are doing something. No, they're not doing anything. They can't. And the only thing they can do is to say, this is not a public health event. We are pointing and telling you that this is bioweapons. Just like RFK wrote a whole book about it called The Wuhan Cover-Up. It's all about the history of bioweapon and biowarfare research. And that's who's in charge.
That's who's in charge.
He's not in charge. And the only thing he can do, which is huge, is today, yesterday, or tomorrow, he can go and he can say there's no more COVID emergency for the PrEP Act. Yes, that's the one thing he can do. And that's why the word countermeasure is now being censored on all social media, because they don't want us to talk about the PrEP Act, which is about countermeasures. They want us to say, oh, he can't do that. There's all these articles that they're writing now. Oh, getting a vaccine off the market is really hard. First of all, it's not a vaccine. It's a countermeasure. It's not a medical product, and it did not go through the regulatory process. So getting it off the market is not getting a medical product off the market. That's not what it is. It is a countermeasure that was approved through authorized through EUA, protected by the PrEP Act. If you stop the emergency declaration, which takes one act by the HHS secretary, not complicated, not like getting a vaccine off the childhood schedule, not like getting a medicine off the market, has nothing to do with that. Health freedom people, nothing to do with that. It is a military countermeasure. And if you can't focus on that, then you're actually a part of the problem. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I triggered you into this, but that's true, because now, Trump just published this EO, which is being paraded as we win, gain of function is banned. If you read the EO, and I did, and I wrote an article about it, it says, we ban it, and then it says, but the military, we will never, stop them from doing anything. No. Those are good guys. Don't touch them. They will do whatever they want. So It's the same. It's the same thing that Obama did when he banned golf. The same exact thing Trump did. Yeah, you can't do that. Oh, and by the way, the verification is by self-certification. So if you're working on bioweapons and you just write a form and check the box that you're not, you're okay, good to go. But the military is totally scot-free, and they can continue doing their bioweapons.
And again, it's like that whole claim that we hear all the time. Well, we have to at least celebrate the wins.
Which wins?
But if you want to celebrate a win, get a win. Because if you're celebrating things that aren't wins, then what you're doing is you're allowing the system to continue to operate, and you're celebrating it because you want to look for wins. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. So Debbie, I would like to end this on a positive note, and that's your book. Because your book was published yesterday. It came out yesterday.
A few days ago. Okay, a few days ago. Your first book. Tell me about your book. Should I hold it up? I don't know if it's going to be backwards and upside down and backwards.
No.
It's called The Deep State Goes Viral. Thank you for that, Cornelia. And it is a compilation of a lot of my writing and research about COVID since 2022, including what we talked about. So including the article where I talked about the PANCAP-A, including all the research that led up to that, including all the research that led up to the dossier. And the first 3 chapters, I would say, I really want people, if they buy the book, which I hope they will, it's also available on audio and on Kindle. The first 3 chapters is like 30 pages, and it just says, this is what happened. And if you just read those 30 pages, I think it will be an excellent introduction to what Sasha and I are talking about and what we've been working on for the past 3 to 4 years.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, and I'm going to see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cornelia.